The house felt different that morning, as if it was holding its breath. I moved down the stairs, the creak of wood beneath my feet amplified in the early morning quiet. Shadows crept across the walls, cast by the gray light filtering through the blinds. In the kitchen, I moved like I was in a crime scene, every detail sharp, every sound magnified. I set the kettle on the stove and took a seat by the window, letting the silence settle over me. The lawn outside was still, mist hanging low in the air. I watched the sun start to break through, scattering gold and gray over the landscape. The smell of freshly brewed coffee rose up, mingling with the lingering hint of lavender from the perfume Laura left on the couch throw. It was a scent I knew by heart, but lately, it felt foreign, like it didn't belong here anymore. She'd been leaving early these days. "Yoga class," she said, with a breezy tone that was almost too casual. She never mentioned it twice, never left any evidence, a water bottle forgotten by the door or a yoga mat propped up in the hallway. Laura was meticulous like that, always wrapping her life in perfect little compartments. Her office, her friends, her so-called yoga classes. If she was lying, she was good at it. I sipped the coffee, its warmth biting against the chill in my gut. It wasn't the first time I'd felt that twist of doubt, a faint nausea gnawing at the edges of my mind. But today, it was something more, a certainty creeping up through the shadows. On impulse, I pulled my phone out of my pocket, held it close, and hit record. My voice, low and steady, filled the silence, sounding more like a stranger than myself. Thursday. Laura left early again, for yoga. I let the last word hang in the air, dripping with sarcasm. I stopped the recording and sat back, watching the light creep across the kitchen tile. Just a memo, I told myself. Just a habit. But we both knew it was more than that. The day unfurled in the usual monotony, files piling up on my desk, reports to be reviewed, and then the new case dropped on me like a thunderclap. The businessman was a high-profile figure, or at least he had been. A body now, found sprawled in his mansion, eyes staring up at a ceiling that would never answer his questions. A death like that always sends ripples through the city's elite, leaving people scrambling to cover tracks, erase connections, and bury secrets. As I combed through the initial report, a list of names started surfacing, a spiderweb of connections linking the victim to powerful figures across the city. Politicians, lawyers, CEOs. This was no random killing. This man had lived on secrets, and, as always, those secrets were tangled up in money and lies. Then, halfway through the list, my hand stopped. A name on the page twisted in my mind. It wasn't familiar, exactly, but it gnawed at me, dredging up a vague memory of something Laura had once mentioned in passing, years ago. A private club, she'd said, for people in the know. She'd made it sound like a joke, a harmless quirk of her old social circles. But I'd noticed the glint in her eye, the way she'd brushed it off a little too quickly. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, letting the pieces start to slide into place. It couldn't be. Yet, I knew too well that the line between coincidence and connection is often a whisper. I pushed the file away and stood, grabbing my coat. The air in my office felt too tight, too heavy with questions I wasn't ready to answer. I left, each step echoing off the cold linoleum tiles, each one grounding me, one layer of certainty building on top of the other. That evening, when I walked through the door, Laura was there, leaning against the kitchen counter, a glass of wine already in hand. She looked immaculate, every line of her figure softened by the low light, her silhouette perfectly framed by the polished countertops and gleaming stainless steel. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her, letting the quiet play out. She glanced up as if sensing my gaze, and for a moment, a strange flicker passed over her face, surprise, maybe, or something like it. But then it was gone, replaced by the smooth, unbothered expression I'd seen 1,000 times. "Rough day?" she asked, swirling the wine in her glass. Her tone was casual, a veneer of warmth layered over something colder. I walked over, opened the fridge, and grabbed a beer, letting the silence fill the space between us. Busy, I said, keeping my voice neutral. She didn't need to know the details. She didn't deserve them. She tilted her head, watching me over the rim of her glass. I saw the news. About that businessman. Her eyes gleamed with interest, a bit too keen, like someone watching a show unfold. It must be intense. All those secrets, all those lies. I met her gaze, steady, unmoving. It's part of the job. You get used to it. Do you? She asked, her lips curving into a small smile. She took another sip, her eyes never leaving mine, and I could feel the unspoken words lying between us like a loaded gun. It was a test, another one of her games, subtle, designed to make me question her, to make me feel like the fool. I didn't answer, just watched her as she tipped her glass back, her throat moving with each swallow, her mouth curving into that easy smile. I'd once thought it was charming, that smile. Now, it felt like a knife, digging deeper with every curve of her lips. After a few moments, she turned her attention back to her phone, her fingers gliding over the screen in quick, practiced movements. I caught the flicker of a smile, the faint light casting her face in shadows. She angled the phone away, a small gesture, but I noticed. I saw everything. I didn't confront her. Not yet. There was no point in stirring the pot when I didn't know what was inside. Instead, I lay awake that night, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing beside me, feeling the weight of her presence in the dark. A part of me wanted to reach out, to shake her, to make her say something, anything, that would shatter the silence. But I stayed still, my hand clenched around the edge of the blanket, my jaw tight. Hours passed, the clock ticking quietly from the nightstand. I slipped out of bed and padded downstairs, the cool tiles grounding me as I moved into the living room. The security app was open on my phone, its faint glow casting eerie shadows across the room. I flipped through the logs, each entry a small marker in the digital landscape of our life. And then I saw it. A disarm at an unusual hour, in the dead of night. 2:17 a.m. I remembered that night, she'd come home late from her so-called yoga. I'd asked, casually, if she was feeling better, and she'd brushed it off with a laugh. But here it was, in cold digital print. A record of her movements, of her lies. The anger simmered, but I kept it buried. There was no use letting it out, no satisfaction in explosive accusations. No, this would require something else, a patience, a strategy, the same slow burn I applied to every case. Laura thought she was clever, thought she could hide behind that perfect mask of hers. She didn't realize that I'd been studying people like her my entire life, that I could peel away her lies one layer at a time. I slid the phone back into my pocket and stood there, letting the darkness settle around me, feeling the cold, calculating edge of resolve sharpen within me. She wouldn't see it coming. The next night, I followed her. She'd told me she had a late work event, the same story I'd heard for months. But this time, I watched as she left, carefully shadowing her car through the city's winding streets until she pulled into the lot of the Alta Vale Hotel. It was a place few had access to, a fortress of glass and steel where the rich and connected lived beyond reproach. I parked on the far side of the lot, slipping out of my car and trailing her from a distance, watching as she breezed past the doorman with a familiar wave. She wasn't here for work. She was here because she was one of them, part of that secretive society I'd unearthed in my investigation of the murdered businessman, the one pulling strings and manipulating events from the shadows. I needed proof, and if anyone could help me infiltrate a digital fortress like theirs, it was Arya Clark. The following day, I reached out to her in the only way I could, through a secure messaging app, leaving a request encrypted with a name she'd know. Years ago, Arya and I had crossed paths during a corporate espionage case. She was a ghost even then, a hacker with no allegiance, known for taking down conglomerates, politicians, anyone who thought themselves untouchable. She'd been a force of chaos then, and I was betting she still was. It didn't take her long to respond. Her message was short: tonight, 9 p.m., Alley 46. Just a time and a place. Classic aria. That night, Alley 46 loomed around me, a dark, narrow stretch of bricks and shadows where streetlights barely reached. I leaned against the wall, waiting. A faint rustle and she appeared, moving from the darkness with the same quiet grace she'd always had, her form barely a shadow under the glow of a nearby lamp. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes studying me with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "I need your help," I said, wasting no time. Clearly. Her voice was cool, a detached edge that hinted at amusement. She leaned back, arms folded. "So, what did your wife get herself into that a detective like you can't handle?" I held her gaze. "This is bigger than me. She's in a network, an organization manipulating city events for money and power. She's not just cheating. She's feeding them information, betraying everything I stand for. I need to take them down, and I can't do it without someone who can crack through layers they think are unbreakable." Arya gave a slow, thoughtful nod, her eyes narrowing. "This society, if it's as powerful as you're hinting, they'll be watching everything. You're talking about a real, dangerous force here. You sure you want to do this?" My answer was immediate. "I don't have a choice." She considered this, then gave a faint smile. "Then neither do I." She handed me a small flash drive. "This will get you access to my secure server. Drop the details there, and I'll see what I can dig up." With Arya on board, my next stop was Dr. Sebastian Monroe. A retired forensic psychologist, Monroe had once been a voice of reason in my life, helping me profile countless criminals. Now, I needed his insights again, not to understand an external suspect, but to see through the web of lies Laura had spun. I found him in his study, a dim room packed with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, their spines worn from years of use. He looked up as I entered, his brow furrowing slightly, his eyes probing. "Ethan," he greeted me, his voice carrying the quiet gravity that had always grounded me. "To what do I owe this surprise?" "I'm in trouble, Sebastian." I sat down across from him, leaning forward. "My wife, Laura. She's been lying to me, feeding information to a society. A powerful network controlling everything from business deals to government elections. I'm starting to think I've never known her at all." He listened, silent, his hands folded in front of him, as I explained everything. When I finished, he let out a quiet sigh, his gaze steady. "This isn't just betrayal, Ethan," he said slowly, his words deliberate. "If she's involved in something this deep, she's playing a game that requires absolute control. She didn't stumble into this. She's here because she wanted to be, because she needed the power it gave her." I nodded, his words aligning with the conclusions I'd come to myself. "Then tell me how to break her, Sebastian. I need to understand her weaknesses, her motives. I need to know how far she's willing to go." He leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. "People like Laura thrive on deception, on the ability to keep everyone around them in the dark. The best way to break her is to force her secrets into the light, one by one, until she's left exposed and vulnerable." His words hit me with a cold clarity, a dark thrill sparking in my veins. "Good," I said, my voice low. "That's exactly what I intend to do." Lily Zhao was the final piece of the puzzle, the only person left who could help me bring this into the public eye. She was known for her exposés, her fierce, relentless dedication to tearing down the corrupt. I'd seen her work, admired her ability to dismantle stories, exposing powerful people with an unyielding fearlessness. It took some work, but I managed to track her down. She was at a small cafe, huddled over her laptop, typing furiously. She didn't look up as I approached, her focus entirely on the screen. "Lily," I said, taking a seat across from her. She looked up, eyebrows raised, a hint of curiosity in her eyes. "Ethan Walker. Didn't think I'd ever see you looking for a story. This isn't just a story, I replied, keeping my tone steady. This is an exposé that could rock this entire city. My wife, she's part of a network, a society controlling events, manipulating people. She's been giving them information, covering up crimes, erasing evidence. I need your help to blow this open. Lily's eyes sharpened, her fingers still poised over the keyboard. So your wife is, what? Some kind of puppet master? Something like that, I said, bitterness seeping into my voice. But she won't be for much longer. I want her secrets out in the open. I want her life destroyed, publicly, for everyone to see. She studied me for a moment, then gave a slow, grim smile. You realize this will get messy. There won't be any going back from something like this. I met her gaze, feeling a dark satisfaction settle in my chest. Good. I'm not interested in going back. With my allies in place, I returned to the Alta Vale Hotel that night, slipping in through a side entrance, blending into the shadows. I made my way up to the top floor, where I'd seen Laura and her associate last time, every step deliberate, my mind focused on the mission. Room 1913 was dark, the door cracked open just enough to give me a glimpse inside. I took a step closer, my hand brushing the wall, straining to catch any sound. Then, the murmurs began, Laura's voice, low and commanding, followed by the voice of another man, rich and arrogant, the type who thought he owned the world. Are the preparations complete? Laura was saying, her tone sharp, businesslike. Yes. The event will proceed without a hitch, the man replied. We'll need to ensure that Walker's investigation is kept contained. He can't be allowed to dig any further. My blood turned to ice. They were talking about me, about keeping me away from the truth. This was deeper than I'd even imagined, a conspiracy that went beyond Laura's betrayal, a plot to manipulate the justice system, to erase anyone who dared to ask questions. The door opened, and I ducked back, hiding in the shadows as Laura and her associate stepped out. They moved down the hallway, their voices fading as they disappeared around the corner. Once I was certain they were gone, I slipped inside the room. It was as opulent as I'd expected, filled with expensive furniture and rich decor. But what caught my attention was the briefcase on the table, left behind in their haste. I moved closer, opening it carefully, my heart pounding as I took in the contents, a stack of documents, each one bearing the names of politicians, officials, businessmen. A web of connections that linked them all back to the society. I took a quick picture, my phone's flash illuminating the documents for a brief moment, enough to capture the damning evidence I needed. Then I slipped back out, moving down the hallway, my mind racing with the implications. Laura thought she was untouchable, protected by a network that operated in shadows. But she'd underestimated me. I had allies, each one of them a weapon in this battle, each one ready to expose her, to tear down the world she'd built. By the time I walked out of that hotel, I knew what had to be done. It was a simple, ruthless plan, one that would dismantle her life piece by piece. And I'd be there to watch, to see her fall, to see the light finally pierce through her carefully woven web of lies. The following day, I met with my team for the first time, a gathering of strangers bound by a single purpose. We'd agreed on an old warehouse near the city's edge, a quiet spot away from prying eyes. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dust and oil, a relic of another time. I stood in the center, watching as Arya, Sebastian, Lily, and Vince arrived one by one, each bearing their own kind of intensity. Arya was first, slipping in through the side door, her eyes sharp beneath her hood, hands buried in her pockets. She nodded at me without a word, her gaze darting around the room as though assessing every possible exit. I'd always known she was careful, she wouldn't have survived this long without it. Dr. Sebastian Monroe arrived next, stepping out of his car and making his way inside with his usual calm. He was unhurried, his gaze steady, analyzing each of us like we were pieces of a puzzle he was piecing together. Then came Lily, her gaze wary, but fierce. She carried a notebook and a recorder, the tools of her trade, but I could tell by the look in her eye that she was ready to go beyond just reporting. She had a personal stake in this now. And finally, Vince Gallagher, a man who didn't know me, but whose hatred for the society ran even deeper than mine. This was the man who'd lost everything to the people we were about to expose. He was our wild card, the one with nothing left to lose. They each took a place around the table, forming a circle in the dim light. Aria leaned against a stack of crates, pulling out her laptop. Sebastian stood beside her, arms folded, watching me with a calm intensity. Lily set her things on the table, waiting for me to speak, while Vince stood off to the side, silent, his gaze fixed on the floor. I cleared my throat, the words coming slowly at first. "Thank you for coming," I began. "You all know why you're here. This isn't just about taking down my wife. It's about dismantling a society of people who have been pulling the strings in this city for years, an elite group of manipulators who think they're untouchable." Arya gave a small, satisfied smile. "Sounds like my kind of job," she murmured, her fingers already tapping across her keyboard. Vince looked up, his eyes hard. "They destroyed my family," he said, his voice rough with barely contained rage. "I don't care what it takes, I'm in." Sebastian's calm gaze shifted from me to the others. "If we're going to do this, it has to be precise. One wrong move, and they'll bury us before we can take them down." Lily nodded. "The public deserves to know what they're dealing with. These people need to be exposed, every detail laid bare for the world to see. I want to make sure that happens." I looked around at them and said, "We're going to work in stages. First, we need hard evidence, names, actions, places. Arya, I need you to dig deep into their systems. I want everything you can find." Arya tilted her head, her eyes glinting with amusement. "You got it. I'll need time to get through their defenses, but if there's a crack, I'll find it. Lily," I continued, "once we have the data, you'll need to craft the story. We can't release this all at once, it'll need to be a steady burn, something that tears at their foundation piece by piece." She gave a small nod, her eyes flashing with determination. "Consider it done. I've handled delicate sources before. This will be poetic." I turned to Sebastian. "I need you to help me understand their tactics. You know how people like this think, how they operate. You can help me anticipate their moves." He nodded slowly. "We'll need to be patient. They'll try to cover their tracks, to protect their secrets. But the harder they try, the more we'll find. They'll reveal themselves eventually. You just have to be willing to wait." And finally, I faced Vince. "Your role is different," I said. "You know some of their players, their habits. You've been tracking them for years. I need you to keep an eye on their movements. Anything suspicious, anything that might give us leverage, you report it to me." Vince gave a short, curt nod. They won't know what hit them. The team was set. Now, it was only a matter of strategy and patience. The first move was Aria's: penetrate their digital fortress, unearth what lay hidden beneath their polished facades. For days, I barely slept, watching the encrypted chat for updates, waiting for the moment she would make contact. Finally, the message came. A single line, "I'm in." I met her that night in a cramped backroom in one of her safe houses, her laptop open on the table, lines of code scrolling across the screen. She didn't look up as I entered, her fingers moving with lightning speed, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the screen. "What did you find?" I asked, my voice low. She smirked, her fingers still flying over the keys. "Enough to bury them. They have files on everything, bribes, blackmail, transactions worth millions. And Laura, she's not just a pawn in their game. She's a player. She's feeding them intel from your cases, covering up leads, steering the department away from anything that might put them at risk." I clenched my jaw, feeling the familiar burn of betrayal. Can you track her movements? Arya nodded, pulling up a map on the screen. Every time she uses their encrypted server, I can see it. She's been meeting with a man, Franklin Dellard, a politician with ties to this society. They've been corresponding for months. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. So it was him. This was more than just a betrayal of marriage. Laura was compromising cases, jeopardizing everything I stood for, trading our life for a dark alliance. The next morning, I briefed the team, laying out everything Arya had uncovered. Sebastian studied the names, his expression thoughtful, his fingers tracing the list like he was assembling a puzzle. "They're using your department as a shield," he said slowly. "With Laura feeding them your investigations, they can cover their tracks before you even get close. They're not just hiding in the shadows. They're hiding in plain sight." Lily's eyes narrowed, her gaze flicking between us. "Then we need to start digging up their secrets, force them into the light. I can leak information to trusted media contacts, publish carefully selected pieces that connect the dots without implicating us directly." I nodded. "Do it. I want the world to start feeling the pressure, to see these people for what they are." The days blurred into weeks. Arya worked tirelessly, hacking through layers of security, unearthing more and more of the society's secrets. Each new file was a revelation, a dark truth that painted the city's elite in shades of corruption and greed. Lily crafted her articles with surgical precision, releasing stories that hinted at the society's reach, each one sparking a wave of public outrage. And Vince. Vince was my shadow. He followed them, tracked their movements, documenting every meeting, every slip, every look exchanged in back rooms and empty offices. He was relentless, a man possessed, driven by the rage of his own loss. But for all our work, Laura remained an enigma. She moved through her life with the same calm composure, unaware of the web tightening around her. She still came home late, still spoke to me with that same easy charm, as though she were the perfect wife, as though the secrets she held were nothing more than whispers in the dark. And I played my part, never letting her see the fury building within me, never revealing the plan unfolding beneath the surface. She thought she was safe, protected by her lies and her alliances. But one night, as she stood by the window, her back to me, I caught a glimpse of something on her phone, a message flashing across the screen. It was brief, only a few words, but it was enough. The text read, "It's done. He won't find out." She didn't see me watching, didn't notice the cold smile that crossed my face. I slipped out of the room, leaving her to her secrets, knowing that soon, very soon, she would face the reckoning she had brought upon herself. In the dead of night, I recorded a new memo, my voice steady, unyielding. "She's revealed her hand. The web is closing in. Soon, Laura, you'll see what it means to be truly exposed." As I ended the recording, I felt a calm settle over me, a quiet resolve that cut through the fury. I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I would see this through to the end. No matter the cost, no matter the consequences. The pieces were in place, and soon, the game would be over. The house was dark when I arrived home that night. I opened the door, stepping inside to the familiar scent of Laura's perfume lingering in the air, as if she'd been there just moments before. The silence wrapped around me, a reminder of the secrets that had festered in every corner of this place. I dropped my coat on the chair, my mind replaying every lie, every carefully crafted deception she'd woven into our lives. And then I saw her, standing by the window, her silhouette outlined in the faint glow from the streetlights. She turned as I approached, her face shadowed, unreadable. "You're home late," she said, her tone as casual as ever, like nothing had changed. "So are you," I replied, my voice flat, controlled. I couldn't let her see the anger simmering beneath the surface, the fury that threatened to erupt with every breath I took. She crossed her arms, watching me carefully. "Is something wrong, Ethan?" I wanted to laugh, to tell her that everything was wrong, that I knew every one of her secrets, that her web of lies was coming undone. But instead, I kept my tone neutral, tilting my head as though considering her question. "That's funny, coming from you," I replied. I thought we both knew where things stood. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, unease, maybe even fear. But she covered it quickly, her mask slipping back into place. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice steady. "Don't you?" I took a step closer, watching her carefully, noting every detail, the way her jaw tightened, the way her eyes shifted ever so slightly. She was on guard now, but I could see her unease creeping through the cracks in her facade. "This whole game, Laura," I continued. "The late nights, the secrecy, the things you think I don't know. You've built an entire life out of lies, and you really thought I wouldn't notice." She stared at me, her expression hardening. "You're being paranoid, Ethan. You've always been like this, always looking for something that isn't there." My jaw tightened, my patience wearing thin. "Don't insult me," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I know everything. I know about your meetings, your contacts, the people you're working for. I know about the society, Laura. And I know you're feeding them information, sabotaging everything I've ever worked for." For a moment, she didn't respond, her face frozen, a statue of controlled fury. But then her lips curved into a small, mocking smile. "So you finally figured it out," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I was wondering how long it would take." She looked at me as though I were nothing, as though this life we'd built together had been nothing more than a means to an end. "So it's true," I said, my voice low, barely containing the rage. "All of it. You've been lying to me, using me, twisting our life into a cover for your filthy games." She tilted her head, her gaze cold, detached. "What did you expect, Ethan? You're a detective, a good one, but naive. You've always been so trusting, so willing to believe in the good in people. I needed someone like that, someone who wouldn't ask questions, someone who'd play his part without even realizing it." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, forcing myself to stay calm. "Was any of it real?" I asked, my voice strained. "Did you ever care about me, or was this all just some twisted game?" She laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the room. "Love, marriage, those are just words, Ethan. You're smart enough to know that. This was never about you. You were useful, that's all. I needed access, and you gave it to me. You made it so easy." I took a step back, the weight of her words crashing over me, each one cutting deeper than the last. I'd spent years believing in her, trusting her, building a life around someone who had never been real, who had never cared. She destroyed everything, and she didn't even care. "You're a monster," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You think you can play with people's lives, ruin everything they've built, and just walk away? You won't get away with this, Laura." She raised an eyebrow, her smile widening. "And who's going to stop me?" "You." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a taunting whisper. "You don't have the spine, Ethan. You never did." The words ignited something in me, a dark, cold resolve that overpowered everything else. I stepped back, nodding slowly, letting her words sink in, feeling them harden into something sharper, something deadly. "You're right, Laura," I said quietly. "I can't stop you, not the way you expect. But I can make sure you lose everything. I can make sure you face the consequences of every single one of your choices." She laughed again, a sound that grated against every nerve. "You don't have the power, Ethan. You don't have the connections. You're just one man, and I have an entire network behind me." I stared at her, feeling the weight of the silence between us, the finality of it. She'd chosen her side, and she'd chosen it without hesitation, without remorse. She was beyond redemption, beyond reason. "You'll see soon enough," I replied, my voice cold, controlled. Enjoy it while it lasts, because soon, you'll be left with nothing. And with that, I turned, walking out of the room, leaving her standing there, her smile fading as she realized that the game was over, that her lies were unraveling, that her empire was crumbling. Later that night, I met with the team, filling them in on everything that had happened, the confirmation of Laura's betrayal, the depth of her deception. They listened in silence, each one of them understanding the weight of what was at stake. Lily was the first to speak, her voice sharp with determination. We need to hit them fast, before they have a chance to regroup. I have contacts at several news outlets, people I trust. They'll run the story as soon as we have everything ready. Arya nodded, her gaze focused, calculating. I'll work on the digital evidence. There's enough on Laura alone to start a firestorm. By the time we're done, the whole city will know what kind of people they're dealing with. Vince leaned forward, his hands clenched. Let me handle the logistics. I've been tracking these people for years. I know their patterns, their habits. If we time this right, we can hit them where it hurts. Sebastian gave a small nod, his expression thoughtful. This isn't just about taking them down. It's about exposing them, making sure they can't rebuild. They'll try to fight back, to erase the damage, but we'll be there every step of the way. I looked around at them, feeling the weight of their loyalty, their commitment to the cause. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours, a shared mission born out of betrayal and anger and a need for justice. This ends now, I said, my voice steady. No more lies, no more secrets. We're going to tear down everything they've built, piece by piece, until there's nothing left. Over the next few days, we worked in silence, each of us carrying out our part of the plan with ruthless efficiency. Arya dug deeper into the society's servers, unearthing files that linked Laura to every major crime, every act of corruption. She exposed their dealings, their alliances, painting a picture of a network built on deceit and greed. Lily crafted the story, weaving a narrative that would capture the public's attention, that would reveal the truth in a way no one could ignore. Her articles went live, one after another, each one a blow to the society's foundation, each one chipping away at their power. And Vince tracked their movements, his reports detailed, precise, giving us the information we needed to predict their every move, to stay one step ahead. As the days passed, the city began to change. People spoke in whispers, rumors spreading of corruption, of betrayal, of secrets brought to light. The society's members were exposed, their names plastered across headlines, their faces filling television screens. Laura's lover, the politician she'd used to shield herself, was disgraced, his reputation shredded, his career in ruins. And Laura. Laura was left alone, her allies gone, her power crumbling, her empire falling around her. The life she'd built, the lies she'd told, the people she'd manipulated, all of it had come crashing down, leaving her with nothing. In the end, I watched from the shadows, unseen, as she faced the consequences of her choices. I didn't need to confront her, didn't need to hear her explanations or apologies. She was already living the punishment I designed, already trapped in the ruins of the life she'd destroyed. And as I walked away, leaving her to face the darkness she'd created, I felt a cold, quiet satisfaction settle over me. She'd thought she was invincible, untouchable. She'd thought her lies could shield her forever. But in the end, the truth had torn her apart, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. Subscribe and stay one step ahead of cheaters. And trust me, the next story makes this one look like a fairy tale.